सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
45 annas worth of goods had vanished from the house in Katra Sheesh Mahal, nestled inside the lanes of Delhi's Chandni Chowk. Kitchen utensils, women's clothes, a hookah, and a little mysteriously, a bowl of kulfi ice cream. Late in 1861, Maiduddin Yar Khan, the son of Muhammad, walked into the Sabzi Mandi police station, one of just 3 in Delhi back then, to report the crime. There's no way of telling what the police, overburdened with investigating gambling, prostitution, stolen mules and murders, made of the curious case of the kulfi thief. The crime was, however, recorded in the first ever First Information Report filed in Delhi. Ever since he took power, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been exhorting Indians to shed their colonial inheritance. Army bands now have Indian musical instruments, there's a new naval ensign, and Rajpath has been renamed Kartavya Path. There's one colonial legacy though, that Prime Minister Modi nor other politicians have shown any interest in eradicating. That's the Police Act of 1861, under which that FIR was filed, and which makes Indian police forces accountable to the political establishment but not India's people. 16 years ago this week, the Supreme Court laid out a blueprint for reforming our colonial-era governance of the police. Among other things, it called on state and central governments to set up independent bodies to regulate the appointments of higher police leadership. The reforms call for giving the police functional autonomy and demanding public accountability in return. Last week, when 4 men rode down a highway in Bihar shooting at random, a rampage police have alleged that was meant to spread fear of their gang, the cause of the failure to reform our police should have become evident to all of us. Local police completely failed to respond as the shooting proceeded. And that isn't the only sign of a criminal justice system in disarray. Efforts to fast-track sexual assault trials are flailing, while new organized crime and terrorism threats are emerging. Legislative models to replace the 1861 Act, emphasizing police accountability, have long been in place. In the years since the Supreme Court judgment, 17 states have passed new police acts, but not one has implemented the independent system for appointments and tenures the Supreme Court had mandated. In most states, political interference in appointments remains the norm, from the level of the station house officer to the Director General of Police. Appointments by the central government too remain clouded by opaque criteria and even more opaque processes. From 1793, under Governor General Charles Cornwallis, the East India Company had set about laying foundations for the modern police force we have today. The responsibility for law and order was then taken from zamindars and handed to darogas or police station chiefs. It didn't go well. They ruled their territories like little kings, the civil servant John Beames recorded in his memoirs. The daroga served the British by being close to the people and keeping an eye on them, Beames wryly noted, but they also served themselves by being close to criminals. Their misdeeds were legion and always went unpunished, Beames observed. The Madras Torture Commission, which investigated the workings of the East India Company police system in 1855, noted that, I quote, "Corruption and bribery reign paramount through the whole establishment, and violence, torture and cruelty are their chief instruments for detecting crime." Following the rebellion of 1857, Imperial British authorities understood the importance of having a civilian police force. Their plan sought, historian Erin Giuliani has noted, to quote, "increase efficiency but diminish expense." There were just 532 enrolled police officers in Bhagalpur in 1862, each responsible on average for a staggering 3,740 people. In practice, that meant rural policing and rural territory was handed over to local elites, and the use of coercion to solve crime, recover stolen goods and suppress dissent remained commonplace. Local village as well as urban police officials reported up to British officers, who in turn were accountable to imperial authorities, not to those they governed. As the empire staged increasingly savage counter-insurgency operations to snuff out ethnic rebellions and also faced the beginnings of our nationalist movement, the repressive role of the police became ever more marked. The lines which separates the protective and repressive functions of a civil force from functions purely military, the administrator William Hunter wrote in 1907, may not always in India be very clear. Following independence, India inherited an anemic police force which had very few tools but terror. The old fear which the police used to inspire among criminals has largely dissipated, lamented the director of the Intelligence Bureau, B.N. Malik, writing in India's first post-independence crime survey in 1953. There has been no improvement in the methods of investigation, he wrote, or in the application of science. In rural areas, Malik reported, the police had simply disappeared as an effective force. The consequences of this disarray soon became evident. In a thoughtful 1971 paper, the scholar David Bailey noted that India reported relatively low levels of crime compared to other countries. But he suggested those figures were misleading. Crime statistics, he wrote, reflect as much about the organization collecting them as they do about the real world. The low level of crime was just an artifact of the thin presence of the criminal justice system, not of peace. Even today, figures published by the Bureau of Police Research and Development show Indian police forces are on an average 20% short of the numbers that the governments itself say they need. Bihar has just 75 personnel for every 100,000 people, well short of the 115 sanctioned. Telangana has 130 instead of 209, Uttar Pradesh 133 instead of 183. You can look at pretty much any state and the story is much the same. The use of modern investigative technology as well as training standards remain poor. There are no consistent standards, expert Sonal Marwa has noted, and most training facilities lack basic amenities as well as sufficient instructors. Training of police personnel, she noted, tends to be militaristic, stressing how to use force rather than the responsibilities of police to civil society. India's central government actually concedes policing has some pretty serious problems. In a note, the Ministry of Home Affairs has said, and I quote, "The police is seen as selectively efficient and unsympathetic to the underprivileged. It is further accused of politicization and criminalization." The central government has provided funding for police modernization since 1969. More than 26,000 crore rupees has been committed for the 5 years from 2021 to 22. But the MHA admits that the results are, and I quote, "not visible on the ground level," and that's because states lack proper advice and assessment. The problem is this diagnosis by the central government doesn't go deep enough. As long as police organizations are not autonomous and responsible for the decisions they make, they will not be accountable either. And they will not be accountable until Prime Minister Modi pushes state governments, especially those ruled by his own party, to bring about genuine legal reform. Ever since 2611, governments have repeatedly promised Indians more efficient, more modern policing. But they've resisted making the institutional changes that can bring it about. In October 1979, on the orders of the Bhagalpur police, 33 under trial prisoners were blinded. We have an account of just what happened on that occasion from a prisoner called Patel Sah. His eyes were gouged out with the kind of needle used to knit sacks, and acid was poured into them drop by drop. Many Bhagalpur residents had cheered this savagery. In a land without law, barbarism might have seemed to them to be some kind of justice. British civil servant James Stephens wrote in 1883, "It's far pleasanter to sit comfortably in the shade, rubbing red pepper in some poor devil's eyes, than to go about in the sun hunting up evidence." The state of criminal injustice built by the empire has now enmeshed itself in the warp and weft of the Indian Republic, degrading its democracy and civic life. That cannot be allowed to continue. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint.